A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at some telemetry from social media monitoring tools yesterday, and it is pretty startling how the conversation around history is shifting. It is not just that people are forgetting things, it is that the memory itself is being re-engineered in real time. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the prevalence of Holocaust denial as a form of misinformation and its relationship with the law. And it really gets into this evolution from fringe denial to what experts are now calling digital distortion. We are recording this on March 24th, 2026, and the timing could not be more critical.
Herman Poppleberry here. It is a heavy topic, Corn, but the data coming out this month, especially from Ireland and the United Nations, makes it impossible to ignore. We are seeing a fundamental shift in how anti-Semitism operates. It is moving away from the old school, flat earth style claim that the Holocaust never happened, and moving toward a much more sophisticated, academic sounding distortion that acknowledges the event but manipulates the scale, the intent, or the historical context to serve a modern political agenda. This is not just about a few people in basements anymore, it is about a mainstreaming of misinformation that is being fueled by the very architecture of our digital lives.
Right, and Daniel's prompt points out that this is not just a historical debate. We are talking about a current, measurable misinformation crisis. I mean, just yesterday, March 23rd, 2026, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution by consensus on this very issue. It was an Israeli-led resolution specifically calling for a clear definition of Holocaust denial and distortion. The fact that it passed by consensus in this geopolitical climate tells you how seriously the international community is starting to take the digital side of this. It is a recognition that the truth of the 20th century is under a sustained, coordinated attack.
The consensus part is vital because it shows that even nations that are often at odds with Israel recognize that if you lose the historical baseline of the 20th century, the entire international legal order starts to fray. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or the IHRA, has been the tip of the spear here. They have a working definition that distinguishes between denial, which is the literal claim that the genocide did not happen, and distortion, which is more insidious. Distortion includes things like minimizing the number of victims, blaming the Jews for their own genocide, or what is called Holocaust inversion, where people equate modern Israeli policy with Nazi atrocities. This inversion is particularly dangerous because it uses the language of human rights to undermine the history of the greatest human rights violation in modern history.
That inversion piece is where it gets really messy in the current discourse. It is a rhetorical weapon that turns the victim into the perpetrator, and it is becoming incredibly common in online spaces. But before we get into the legal weeds, I want to look at the data because some of these numbers are genuinely shocking. We just had the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland, the JRCI, release their first ever comprehensive report on March 2nd. Maurice Cohen, the chairman there, has been calling for a national strategy because the numbers they found over just a 6-month period from July 2025 to January 2026 are pretty grim. It seems Ireland is becoming a bit of a case study for how these trends manifest in a modern Western democracy.
They documented 143 anti-Semitic incidents in Ireland in that short window. But the part that connects to Daniel's prompt is that 17% of those recorded incidents specifically involved Holocaust denial or distortion. That is nearly 1 in 5. And when you look at the parallel survey conducted by the Claims Conference, the numbers get even more granular and, frankly, more concerning regarding the younger generation. We are seeing a massive disconnect between the historical record and the perceived reality of people under the age of 30.
You are talking about that knowledge gap, right? because the Claims Conference found that 9% of Irish adults across the board believe the Holocaust is a myth. But when you zoom in on the 18 to 29-year-olds, 19% of them believe the death toll of 6 million is, quote, greatly exaggerated. That is nearly 1 out of every 5 young adults in a modern Western democracy who thinks the foundational data of the Shoah is a fabrication or a massive exaggeration. Herman, how does that happen? How do we have more access to information than ever before, yet nearly 20% of young people are falling for these distortions?
It is the paradox of the digital age, corn. It gets worse when you look at basic literacy. 50% of Irish adults could not correctly identify the 6 million figure. If you do not know the number, you cannot identify when someone is trying to distort it. This is why the digital impact is so massive. A 2026 analysis by UNES, CO, and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue found that nearly 50% of Holocaust-related content on Telegram denies or distorts facts. On TikTok, it is about 17%. When you have a population where half the people do not know the basic facts, and they are spending hours on platforms where half the content is distorted, you are looking at a perfect storm for radicalization. These algorithms are not designed for truth, they are designed for engagement, and outrage or hidden truths are highly engaging.
It feels like a failure of the education system, but also a victory for the algorithm. If you're a 20-year-old in Dublin or Cork, and you are seeing these slickly produced videos on your feed that use pseudo-scientific language to question gas chambers or transport records, and you do not have that 6 million figure anchored in your head as a baseline, you are going to be susceptible. You might not think you are a denier. You might just think you are being a critical thinker. Herman, you have been digging into the research on how these narratives spread. Is it still the same old tropes, or has the packaging changed?
The packaging has become much more professional. It often frames itself as just asking questions or being a brave truth teller against an establishment narrative. This is where the term distortion is so much more accurate than denial. Pure denial is easy to debunk with a photo or a survivor testimony. But distortion says, sure, people died, but it was from typhus, or the numbers were inflated for reparations money. It uses half-truths to build a lie. This is why the JRCI report is so significant. It is the first time Ireland has had this kind of hard data to present to the Taoiseach and the government to say, look, this is not a fringe issue. It is affecting how our Jewish community feels about their place in the country. Maurice Cohen is essentially saying that the digital world is bleeding into the physical safety of Irish citizens.
Chief Rabbi Yoni Wida has been very vocal about that. He has used the word fragility to describe the sense of Jewish belonging in Ireland lately. When you see a 60% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, as we discussed in a previous episode about Ireland's crisis, that fragility becomes a lived reality. If you are a Jewish student and your peers are casually citing TikTok videos that say the Holocaust was a myth, that is not just a historical disagreement. It is a fundamental rejection of your reality and your safety. It creates an environment where you feel like a stranger in your own home, because the people around you are living in a different factual universe.
The legal response to this is where it gets fascinating and very complicated. There is a massive divide between the American model and the European model. In the United States, we have the First Amendment. Holocaust denial, as repugnant as it is protected speech unless it crosses the line into inciting imminent lawless action. But in more than 15 European countries, including Germany, France, and Austria, it is a criminal offense. You can go to jail for it. The European perspective is that some lies are so dangerous to the fabric of a democratic society that they cannot be allowed to circulate freely. They see it as a matter of public order and the protection of human dignity.
And we are seeing that tension play out right now in Romania. There were protests just a few weeks ago, and they are continuing today, March 24th, because of amendments made in January to their anti-extremism laws. The Romanian government is trying to tighten the belt on fascist propaganda and Holocaust denial, but critics are arguing that the language is so broad that it could be used to shut down legitimate political speech. It creates this catch-22. Do you protect the historical truth by force of law, or do you protect the principle of free speech even when it allows for the spread of dangerous lies? Romania has a very complex history with both the Holocaust and communism, so they are hyper aware of how historical narratives can be weaponized by the state.
It is the classic liberal dilemma. But there is another side to the legal landscape that is not about criminalizing speech, but about correcting the material record. I am talking about the HEAR Act of 25, the Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act. The U.S. House of Representatives just passed this on March 16th, and it is heading to the President's desk. This is a huge deal for survivors and their families. It basically removes those technical loopholes like statutes of limitations that have blocked people from recovering art that was looted by the Nazis. It is a way of saying that the passage of time does not make a stolen object legal, and it does not make the crime go away.
That feels like a more productive legal avenue in some ways. Instead of just policing what people say, you are actively dismantling the legacy of the crime. If you can prove the provenance of a painting and show it was stolen during the Shoah, the law now says the clock does not run out on justice. It is a way of legally affirming that the events happened and that they have ongoing material consequences in 2026. It anchors the history in physical objects and legal titles, which is much harder to distort than a digital video.
And it ties back to the work of the Claims Conference. They are the ones who handle the negotiations for compensation and conduct these global surveys. Their work is about institutional memory. When they put out a survey showing that 19% of young adults in Ireland think the death toll is exaggerated, they are providing the evidence that governments need to justify educational reform. You cannot fix a problem you have not measured. They are essentially the data-driven backbone of the fight against distortion. They are showing that the knowledge gap is not just an accident, it is a measurable trend that correlates with the rise of digital misinformation.
Let's talk about that UN resolution again. The one from yesterday. If it passed by consensus, that means countries that are traditionally very hostile to Israel, or even countries with their own issues with historical revisionism, signed on. What does that resolution actually require? Is it just a strongly worded letter, or are there teeth to it? Because we see a lot of resolutions that just end up gathering dust on a shelf in New York.
It is a General Assembly resolution, so it does not have the same enforcement power as a Security Council resolution, but it sets a global norm. It provides a formal framework for what constitutes distortion. It encourages member states to develop educational programs and to work with social media companies to flag this content. It is about creating a unified front. When the UN says that questioning the scale of the Holocaust is a form of anti-Semitic distortion, it makes it much harder for platforms like TikTok or Telegram to claim that this is just a matter of opinion or historical debate. It gives the platforms a standard to point to when they decide to take content down.
It is interesting to see how the definition of anti-Semitism is being codified at the international level. The IHRA definition has been adopted by over 30 countries now. But there is still a lot of pushback, particularly around the idea of Holocaust inversion. Some people argue that comparing contemporary events to the Holocaust is a legitimate form of political hyperbole. But the IHRA and this new UN resolution are saying no. That is a specific tactic used to diminish the unique nature of the genocide and to demonize the Jewish state. They are arguing that by making everything a Holocaust, you eventually make the real Holocaust meaningless.
The logic behind that is that if everything is a Holocaust, then nothing is the Holocaust. If you use that language for every conflict or every policy you dislike, you are stripping the original event of its historical weight. You are distorting the memory to serve a polemic. And for the survivors who are still with us, or their children, that is a form of secondary trauma. It is why someone like Yoni Wieder in Ireland is so concerned. When the public discourse becomes saturated with these inversions and distortions, the actual history gets buried under the noise. It makes it impossible to have a serious conversation about the past when the past is being used as a cheap political prop in the present.
I want to go back to the global stats for a second. The ADL and Statista report from early last year, 2025, said that about 4% of the global population are outright deniers. That seems low, but 4% of 8 billion people is still 320 million people. That is basically the population of the United States. But then you look at distortion, and the numbers jump. In the Americas, 15% believe the scale was exaggerated. In the Middle East and North Africa, that number is 33%, 1 in 3. That is a massive portion of the human population that believes the history we are talking about is a lie.
That 33% figure is a direct result of state-sponsored narratives in some of those regions where Holocaust denial and distortion have been used as a tool of geopolitical warfare for decades. But the 15% in the Americas is the one that should wake people up. That is not coming from state propaganda, it is coming from the digital ecosystem we all live in. It is coming from that 50% of content on Telegram that UNESCO flagged. We are seeing a convergence where the tropes once confined to the fringes of the Middle East or the neo-Nazi underground are now being mainstreamed through social media algorithms in the West. It is a globalization of misinformation.
And the platforms are struggling, or maybe they are just unwilling to keep up. If 17% of Holocaust content on TikTok is distortion, and TikTok is the primary news source for a huge chunk of that 18 to 29 demographic, you can see exactly why the Claims Conference survey found what it did in Ireland. It is a direct pipeline from the algorithm to the belief system of the next generation. If you are fed a steady diet of "did you know the numbers were faked" videos, and you do not have the educational background to counter it, that becomes your reality.
This is where the legal battle in Romania is so relevant. They are trying to find a way to stop that pipeline without destroying the freedom of the internet. It is a delicate balance. If you make the laws too broad, you risk authoritarianism. If you make them too narrow, you leave the door wide open for malicious actors to radicalize your population. Romania is trying to navigate this in real time, and the protests show just how contentious it is. People are afraid that in the name of fighting misinformation, the government will start silencing any dissent. It is a tension that every modern democracy is going to have to face as the digital world becomes more chaotic.
It is also about the second-order effects of this misinformation. If you believe the Holocaust was exaggerated, you are much more likely to believe other anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It is a gateway drug to radicalization. Once you have been convinced that the entire world has been lied to about the most documented event in human history, you are ready to believe almost anything. You are primed to see the world through a lens of secret cabals and hidden agendas. It breaks your trust in all institutions. Media, academia, government.
That is a crucial point. Holocaust distortion is rarely an isolated belief. It is usually part of a broader worldview that involves a distrust of institutions, a belief in globalist conspiracies, and a deep-seated animosity toward the Jewish people. This is why Maurice Cohen and the JRCI are pushing for a national strategy. They realize that you cannot just play whack-a-mole with individual incidents. You have to address the underlying misinformation environment that makes those incidents possible. You have to build a society that is resilient to these narratives, and that starts with education and data literacy.
So what is the takeaway for someone listening who sees this stuff in their feed? Because it is not always as obvious as a swastika or a flat-out denial. How do you spot the distortion? How do you know when you are being manipulated by a slick historical video?
The first step is looking for the minimization of scale. If someone is hyper-focused on questioning specific numbers or technical details of the camps while ignoring the mountain of corroborating evidence from the perpetrators themselves, that is a red flag. The Nazis were meticulous record keepers. We have their own documents. Another thing to watch for is the false equivalence, the Holocaust inversion we talked about. If someone is using the imagery of the Shoah to describe modern political events that bear no actual resemblance to a state-orchestrated industrial genocide, they are distorting history. They are trying to hijack the emotional weight of the Holocaust for their own ends.
And I would add that we need to be aware of the source. If the content is coming from anonymous accounts on Telegram or TikTok that specialize in counter-narratives and hidden truths, you have to ask why they are so invested in undermining this specific historical fact. Institutional memory matters. Organizations like the Claims Conference and the IHRA are not just there to preserve the past. They are there to protect the truth from being eroded by the digital tide. We have to trust the experts and the survivors over the anonymous truth-tellers on social media.
It is also about data literacy. When we see that 50% of adults in a country like Ireland cannot identify the 6 million figure, that is a call to action for education. We have to move beyond the shallow, once-a-year assembly and actually teach the mechanics of how this genocide happened and how it was documented. Knowledge is the only real vaccine against distortion. If you know the facts, the lies do not stick. We need to empower the next generation with the tools to see through the digital smoke and mirrors.
It feels like we're at a bit of a turning point. With the UN resolution yesterday and the HEAR Act passing in the US, there is a global movement to shore up the legal and social defenses of historical truth. But at the same time, the digital tools for distortion are getting more powerful every day. It is a race between education and the algorithm. We are seeing governments finally wake up to the fact that historical truth is a matter of national security and social cohesion.
And the stakes are high. As Yoni Weider said, the sense of belonging for Jewish communities in the West is feeling fragile. That fragility is a direct result of the normalization of these distorted narratives. If we want to maintain a pluralistic, stable society, we have to be willing to defend the historical baseline. We cannot have a functioning democracy if we cannot even agree on the basic facts of what happened in the 20th century. If the foundation of our history is allowed to rot, the whole structure of our society is at risk.
I think that is a good place to wrap this one. It is a lot to process, but staying informed on these shifts is the first step. The JRCI report and the UN resolution are huge markers for where we are in March 2026. If you want to dive deeper into the specific situation in Ireland, we covered the broader rise in anti-Semitism there in episode 9079. It provides a lot of the context for why this JRCI report was so necessary, and why Maurice Cohen is pushing so hard for a national strategy.
And if you are interested in the legal nuances of how history and modern politics intersect, check out episode 743. We went deep on that fine line between political criticism and the kind of distortion we have been talking about today. It is a complex landscape, but the data is starting to give us a much clearer picture of the challenges we are facing. We have to be vigilant, both in our laws and in our own digital consumption.
We should probably mention the HEAR Act one more time because it really is a landmark piece of legislation. It is a rare example of the legal system working to proactively correct historical wrongs by removing those procedural barriers that have stood in the way of justice for 80 years. It shows that even 8 decades later, the law can still be a tool for truth. It is a reminder that while the digital world might be full of distortion, the physical world still has mechanisms for accountability.
It is a moral victory as much as a legal one. It says that the passage of time does not diminish the crime, and it does not diminish the right of the victims to be made whole. In a world of digital distortion, that kind of concrete material justice is more important than ever. It provides a necessary counterweight to the ephemeral nature of online misinformation.
All right. That's our look at the evolution of Holocaust denial and distortion in 2026. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumintop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. We could not do this deep dive analysis without that kind of infrastructure.
This has been My Weird Props. We really appreciate you guys tuning in and engaging with these tougher topics. It is how we keep the conversation grounded in reality. In an age of distortion, staying grounded is the most important thing we can do.
If you are finding these episodes valuable, a quick review on your favorite podcast app goes a long way in helping other people find the show. It really does make a difference in how we grow and how we continue to bring these stories to light.
Catch you in the next one.
See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth.